When we look at the important dates in the sport of wrestling, April 9th, 2022 will probably be near the top of that list. Today, we're talking with Ashley Flavin, the head coach at Life University, and Lee Miracle, the head coach at Campbellsville University. And we say that of their women's programs because today, the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics, the NAIA, at their annual convention, officially approved women's wrestling as a championship sport, the NAIA's 28th sport. This is something that's been a long time coming. We're going to get that immediate response from two of the best coaches in the NAIA and two championship coaches, as Life won the dual meet championship this year and Campbellsville won the NAIA Invitational National Championship this year. So two of the best that know how to do it and two that have a varied, diverse, but both important background in the sport of wrestling. First of all, thanks for taking time out on your Saturday to jump on this episode of the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. As an advocate of women's wrestling for a long time, I kind of got choked up a little bit when I got the information like this was going to happen, and then it officially happened today. And I'm like, we can't wait till Monday, we can't wait till Tuesday. This needs to be done right now. Families upstairs, y'all's families are somewhere else. Let's talk women's wrestling. I'm going to start with you, Ashley, because you were obviously a female women's athlete. Came through. You wrestled for Oklahoma City, but you came through in a time that women's college wrestling opportunities were minuscule. And then when you finally had a chance to wrestle at the college level with an NAIA program, you were at an extended, I don't want to say an advanced age, but for a college athlete, save the COVID years that we've gotten, you were in your 20s by the time you had a chance to compete in college. So talk about this, the impact of this announcement, not from a coaching perspective yet, but from your experience as a female athlete coming through, having not had these opportunities, to now the girls that are coming through high school that you're going to coach eventually or have a national championship, not just not a name only kind of thing. This is an official national championship by a respected organization.
So thanks for having us to start with, Jason, and being a part of women's wrestling and being such a fan of the sport and of us. Something that a lot of people forget because it wasn't super memorable, and I try to forget, even though it was very memorable for me, is I actually wrestled at Missouri Valley in 2001, way before my Oklahoma City times. And so at that point, there were only the three universities. There was Missouri Valley, there was the University of the Cumberlands, and then University of Minnesota Morris, which has long since left us. But the options were very slim. And I was there for a year, and really, women's wrestling was started at the college level because we didn't have an Olympic Training Center resident program at that point. And so all of those things sort of just started to snowball at the same time. And I ended up going to the OTC for a while before I went to OCU. Like you alluded to, I was in my mid-20s when I got to OCU. And so it was a little bit of a different experience at that point for me. But even then, there were only 7 or 8 colleges that had women's wrestling, and that was in 2007. And so to see the growth since then, to see really the level of acceptance that we've gotten throughout the country, throughout different colleges and organizations. On Twitter, I said earlier today, I remember when people were surprised that girls were allowed to wrestle. Not just that we wrestled, but that someone was letting us do that. And so having championship status, I think in a lot of ways legitimizes women's wrestling for the rest of the world. It's something that you've known for years, Jason. It's something that Coach Miracle has known for years. But for those outside the sport, I think this gives us a sense of true legitimacy. And it really is hard to put into words because it doesn't change our day to day, but it means so much to have it be recognized as a championship sport.
Coach Miracle, you've had the opportunity to coach both your kids. You had a son that wrestled at the Division I level, and your daughter Kayla was one of the top high school wrestlers and one of the top collegiate wrestlers of all time, winning 4 national championships. But you look at those national championships, we've had an alphabet soup when it comes to women's wrestling, and now we have, the two main 4-year offerings are the NCAA and the NAIA. The NCAA has it as an emerging sport and now a championship sport here on the NAIA side. And the opportunities now, you've seen Kayla have to go through some hurdles, and she had doors open for her for Trailblazers and such. to have the opportunity to compete on world teams, but the college avenue really wasn't. It was there, and she took it at Campbellsville, as you're the only coach they have. But from a father's standpoint, to see, man, how far this sport has come, to know that there is a bona fide national championship officially out there for women's college wrestling.
To think back when Kayla started her high school career and looking at what the opportunities were at that time, there just wasn't a whole lot. But you knew that they were coming. You just didn't know how fast they were going to be. And then, of course, fast forward a few years, and I took this job here, started this program at Campbellsville University, and I believe we were like I want to say 18th or something like that, 18th college at that time. But starting that program then, and Kayla's not even in college yet. She's still a senior in high school. So her college opportunities, like you said, were starting to come along, but nothing like what we're seeing now. And, like I said, we knew it was going to come. We knew it was going to happen if we just kept working toward that goal. And finally we're here, and it's kind of a great day to celebrate.
Now we got to look at it from the coaching perspective, because we've had the personal stories, and there's so much more we could go in depth there. But as the announcement came out, the NAIA will begin to work on determining several logistical terms. We'll talk about the logistics qualification possibilities. We'll kind of tiptoe on that, because I want to get somebody from the NAIA to talk about that on a future episode. But now, as a coaching standpoint, we've had just the growth at this level, and then there's now with the NCAA and its emerging sports status, there's going to be kind of a pull for some of those top recruits on, okay, who's going to go where, especially with Division I programs, especially the one in Iowa City coming on board. That there's going to be a draw for those top recruits to go to the other side right now. And how is you as an NAIA coach, start with you, Ashley, going to be able to say, hey, look, this is an actual opportunity. A lot of these schools were the first, were trailblazers. The schools that have actually given women's wrestling a pulse are in the NAIA, and some of the better Division II programs have started in the NAIA. So there's the recruiting pitch of your school, but there's also now the recruiting pitch of national championship versus national championship that's soon to be a discussion point.
So I was talking to Coach Shirley Stevens at the University of Cumberland, just kind of on Facebook a little bit today, and what you said is absolutely right. The NAIA has been and still is, in my opinion, the backbone of women's wrestling, and really has laid the foundation for the history of women's wrestling. And I think there is something exciting to potentially be the first. We were all fighting to be the first NAIA Invitational champion. We all wanted that. But now to be able to, as a team, say we won the first national championship where it's been recognized is something, as a coach, that's exciting. Is something as athletes that is potentially really exciting. It doesn't change our day to day, but there is something to look and say, hey, there's legitimacy there. The letters NAIA are at the front of our national title. It's not a different set of letters. It's one of those things that you can't quite put your finger on what the value is until you feel it. And I know for our institution, they're very excited because this helps with things like the Director's Cup points with the NAIA. I've called it the all-sport national champion of the NAIA, and women's wrestling hasn't had points. And this year alone, I know, I believe you get 100 points if you win. So that would have been 100 points for Campbellsville for winning, or 80 points for us for taking fourth. And so institutionally, that's important. And the support that an institution gives may already be great, but it might step it up just a titch more. And I think that our athletes will see that in ways that, they won't quite be able to put their finger on, oh, this is because we're a championship sport. But now, where there was already a very good level of support, we might get that extra push of, extremely good, or, just a little push forward.
Lee, when we look at what this means for Campbellsville, let's go institutionally on this. I mean, Ashley alluded to the Director's Cup points. What do you think this is going to do for not just your program, your women's wrestling team there, but Frankie James's team, the entire school as a whole? Where do you think this helps Campbellsville University?
Well, I think that, looking ahead and thinking about how we have an opportunity now to win a national championship, for Campbellsville University, for this town. That's a really big deal. Instead of it just being an invitational status, having it be an actual real national championship is, I think it's monumental for educating everyone around here what women's wrestling is.
There's also, the NAIA has kind of been not been afraid to take chances. And the NAIA schools also not afraid to take chances. I know, Lee, I'm not sure if this is offered at Campbellsville or not. I haven't gone through the entire roster of sports there, but there are schools in that part of the country where bass fishing is an opportunity. We're not talking about esports. We're talking about archery, bass fishing. We're talking about women's flag football that are being offered at NAIA programs. And now this is given women's wrestling. It's not one of those. It's not in that vein anymore. It's not looked at as, okay, Lindenwood used to classify it as a student life sport. Now it's varsity sport. This is a national championship sport. So, Ashley, as a whole, the women's wrestling landscape, I guess, trying to put in perspective what this really does mean, take institutional and league out of it, what it means for the entire industry, I guess, of women's wrestling.
I think it takes us out of, like you're saying, that niche sport of, oh, they're a one-off. They just sort of exist because a couple students on campus had an interest. This truly shows that women's wrestling is at the forefront, and fans of wrestling know that women's wrestling is the fastest growing sport. But this truly tells the public, the layperson, that women's wrestling is on par and side by side with any of the other sports that the NAIA offers, because we wouldn't have a national championship if that interest wasn't there and those numbers weren't there. And so it's next to swimming. There's swimming, which everyone recognizes, and now right next to swimming is women's wrestling, and I think that says a lot.
Lee, administratively, what have your administrators thought about this move, and what were they thinking when they heard that this was rapidly becoming a possibility?
I actually we had to vote on it. When I went online to do my vote, I took a picture of it and sent it to my AD, and he was really excited about it, and knew that this was something that could happen this year, and he just seemed like he was ready for it, and he understands the importance as well.
And Ashley, your AD has been very vocal on social media about her new love for the sport of wrestling, not just women's wrestling, but Omi Acosta's men's team that won a national title last year, not this most previous season, but the year before, and what it's brought to that campus. So, I mean, administratively, you've seen your athletic director become a diehard wrestling fan and a diehard women's wrestling fan at that as well. So what's that been like to watch somebody that had no experience in the sport that's leading this university that's, again, has a dynamic athletic program. They're a traditional rugby power. People know life because of chiropractic and rugby. So you're adding wrestling to that. So what's it like to see your administration really get behind the sport as well?
I think so it's been really fun with Jamie specifically, because there are conversations early on that we had about athletes who maybe missed weight and having to explain how making weight, what that process looks like, and how you can do it in a healthy way. And it's not bad, but we do have to have discussions about weight. To now, is everybody on weight? Good. Tell them to do their job. And so just sort of that change in dynamic has been really fun. But I think for us, we've seen it in a very tangible way, that we have our new facility that's being built, and ground's already broken. Walls are up. We'll have it by the time season starts next year, by the time athletes are on campus. And so you can see very, very tangibly how excited our administration is. When we got the vote, just like Coach Miracle, I got a hold of Jamie. I got a hold of my athletic director, and I was a little bit, not that I wasn't optimistic, but I always like to check with her before big votes happen. And is there something that I'm missing? Is there a reason why I should vote no? And she said, there's not. She said, no, you vote yes. There's not a reason. There's not a chance. There's no reason to say no. So we're really excited.
One thing we've seen again is the rise of the sport through the NAIA is these schools. It's when they add men's and women's wrestling, you see it as, schools need enrollment, but they're also seeing the value of the sport and the value that the NAIA is putting on the championships. And I'll say this, having not attended the Women's Invitational yet, keyword there being yet.
Well, you never will. You never will now, Jason.
As long as that's another thing. We need to shift. You're right. I've never attended an invitational. I didn't know where you're going with that. Now I realized it. Yeah, I'm still jet lagged from Budapest, but when we'll talk scheduling later, but having seen what the NAIA does and has done for its men's championship the last 11, 12 years that I've attended the event, there's been a significant, interest in growing it and getting the exposure out there. And I'm curious on what you've seen from the NAIA as a whole, getting behind it as an invitational sport. And where do you think this is going to go from their leadership point with the first women's national championship officially? I'll start with you, Lee, on that.
Well, I think that we're committed to Jamestown, North Dakota for the next couple of years. And, besides the location is actually not bad at all. If you erase the bad luck of COVID and you erase the cyclone dump that we had the first year, but other than some bad luck, it's actually a very supportive town. The university's behind it. I think NAIA coupled with Jamestown has really put on a great show for us. I think it's been really awesome. The girls have liked it. Except for the bad luck that we've had with COVID and the cyclone dump. Other than that, I think we're okay.
Ashley, your thoughts on where you think the NAIA is going to go with the championships in terms of, its growth potential, its exposure, that type of thing?
I agree with Coach Miracle. The town is very supportive, and the venue that we're in is beautiful, but it is still at a college. And I think I really like the idea of that neutral site of really being able to put on the show that way. And I would be excited for us to move in that direction. I think that would be something that would be very exciting for the athletes to really elevate. Truly do a championship experience.
We look for the next steps of, we touched on it before we started, as what's logically now going to happen. So to backtrack a little bit, how have we qualified athletes to the Invitational? What's the process been like? And where do you see a format coming for access to the championship? I'll start with you, Ashley.
So qualify is a very generous word. Right now, the rules are each institution can bring 12 athletes, and you don't have to compete in the conference championship. You truly don't have to have competed all year. You're 12 from each institution go. We can bring 2 per weight class, just like the men, but max of 12. And so we're looking at moving into qualifiers, and I'm going to say across as I, look across the table into my video here. But so I'm sitting across from, inarguably even one of the other best programs in the country, led by Coach Miracle. And we're in the same conference. We're conference rivals. We're battling nearly every week against each other. And in a lot of ways, we've truly put ourselves in one of the luckiest positions that there could be, because as we move to qualifiers with such a strong conference, we are still going to have a very good chance of getting 12 per institution. So that's something for me that's exciting, and a time when I'm grateful for great competition week in and week out, because that'll help us as we move to the next steps.
And you touched on an interesting point, Ashley. One thing that the men have really kind of been able to wave the flag on, and Coach Miracle, I'll let you speak on this, is the access of multiple athletes per weight class. The NCAA doesn't have this. The California junior colleges have it, and the NAIA has it, where you can put 12 into a regional qualifier or conference qualifier and get all 12 to the nationals. Just the opportunity for multiple weight classes just helps women's wrestling so much.
Well, it's really helped us competitively and just, bringing girls along. Obviously, if I could put 12 girls in instead of 10 girls, there's 2 more girls I can give the experience to. Coming through the season, sometimes the hardest thing or the scariest thing is coming up on the end of the season, trying to choose who those 12 are going to be. Now it's going to be a situation where they're going to qualify and they're going to earn it, and it's going to be kind of cut and dried. It's not going to be me deciding it anymore.
Yeah, it's putting the 12 in the wrestle off. It's like, all right, win the spot. You're the entry in the conference, and then it's, I guess, what the hardest decision to be like, who are the extra 2 going to be? Because we've seen teammates versus teammate on the men's side in the national championships wrestle for national championships multiple times. So that's also a very cool thing to see. Now, next steps, again, I keep saying next steps because there's always going to be next steps. We're over 40, and sometimes we hit a point where we're adding too many schools too quickly. In terms of the growth at the high school level, we went from an era where we had maybe a handful of states sponsoring it to where we're in the 30s now. Personally, I see 8 years from now being the real, just blossoming point of college wrestling, because we'll have 2 full graduating classes of high school kids coming through those 30-something states that have sanctioned it. So from a recruiting standpoint, there's going to be more opportunities, more girls to choose from. The quality of competition, as we've seen, has gotten exponentially better almost every cycle, every 4-year cycle of high school kids coming through. So from a recruiting standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, from a compliance standpoint, from a sanity standpoint, I don't want to say Wild West, because there's processes to recruit and there's compliance and such. But Coach Miracle, how is this going to change things? Looking forward for the next decade for women's wrestling, and we have a national championship here. We could see one being added from the other organization that's had it as an emerging sport, and the lure of bigger schools and brighter lights, so to speak. So this is only going to get more difficult as a coach.
Yeah, and a lot of people ask me around town, and just friends of mine, they say, if you win back-to-back national championships, does that make recruiting easier? And I think it does make recruiting easier, but recruiting's still hard. You still have to put in the time. You have to talk to the athletes and the families, and you have to have the visits, and you have to make the trips. And so the time away from your family and the time that you put into it, I don't think changes. I think that just maybe the caliber and maybe your list is a little bit longer. But I think that now with the national championship, I've had several discussions with girls that are asking about that. They're asking about how is the NAIA different than the NCAA? And that's an interesting question for a young girl to ask and for us to talk about. But now for us to have an official national championship, that's one step that we'll have above the other organization.
I guess, Ashley, how do you answer that question?
So from a compliance standpoint, we actually already comply with the NAIA rules, not just we, but all the great we. We had our first year of invitational status. Everybody had a chance to get used to the rules. And then year 2 of invitational status, everyone had to be in compliance. So there's no real change there. There's no rules to set up. The rules are already set. We already have our playbook, so to speak. So that makes it a lot easier. People want to go to a program that's good, which that part of recruiting is helpful. But the hard part is, and I'm putting myself in the shoes of a 136-pounder 6 years ago, calling Coach Miracle and saying, I want to be on your team, and him having to explain, well, understand who you're standing behind, understand who you're going to have to wrestle with every day and fight for that spot. And so being a good team does pose some difficulties, especially with a lot of smaller institutions with less athletes where they can be promised a spot. Whereas I'm guessing, I don't know Coach Miracle's recruiting pitch, but I don't promise spots, and I'm sure he doesn't. I'm sure he says, come in and do the work and figure it out. And so that poses its own challenges. I think, like you're saying, programs are adding, and I don't want to put a damper on the day because it's so exciting, but what we need is the athletes that we have now that are really going to get the true experience of being a college athlete, having a championship tournament, to become coaches, to fill these coaching voids. Because even though we have huge growth at the grassroots, because up top we're still so thin, we don't have the coaches to put in yet. And so that's something that, like you said, over the next 8 years, I think will work itself out, but is something that's a little bit of a struggle right now as for the sport as a whole.
And I think that's a great point to bring up, because this is the drum we beat for small college wrestling, both on the men's and women's side, is where do your high school coaches and teachers come from? You're not going to have, and I use Brent Metcalf as an example quite frequently. I said, Brent Metcalf's not going to be your high school coach. It's just, you're not going to have multiple time national champions as a regular. Yeah, they exist at the high school level, but a lot of the times your PE teacher, your health teacher, your history teacher, that is the wrestling coach. And now that can be that can be a woman wrestling coach. There are women coaching boys high school teams. Brianna Delgado coached the men's team at the NAIA championships at Central Methodist this year as the interim coach. So that's happened at the college level. But the opportunities for the next level of teachers and coaches now to also be women in this great sport is, to me, that is just an astronomical asset to our sport. It's not just the small college guy that loves the sport that's giving back. Now it can be the small college girl or small college woman in there that's like, I love coaching, I love teaching, I can give back to the sport like it gave back to me, like the men have been able to do for generations, to have this opportunity, not just for the women to compete, but for the women to be leaders, coaches, mentors, teachers. I think that's only going to help that 8 years that we're talking about and can become 16. Let's do exponents of 8 to just be fun with it. But just the opportunity for that to steamroll and grow the sport, boys and girls, men and women, to me is just a huge, huge plus too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to take away from the men that are doing the job and have done the job since the beginning, because I wouldn't be where I'm at without male coaches of the past. There is something special to be able to look up and see somebody that looks like you and to be represented. I think Jason, I always go to you for my stats, so I'm going to make you look this one up. The 5th or 6th woman to be hired as a head coach of a college program. So growing up, I just didn't think it existed. And so for young women to now see that opportunity is real and they can follow in Coach Miracle's footsteps, my footsteps, Terry Steiner's footsteps, and get to the point where they're coaching a national championship team is really exciting.
Yeah, Lee, I want to touch on you a little bit about that father standpoint in your conversations with Kayla. What kind of conversations have you had with her about this in terms of her career goals, where she's doing once she's done being a senior level professional wrestling? They are professionals. That's what they're doing. So, those opportunities will exist for her that, again, they didn't when she was just getting on the mat for the first time.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain that Kayla's going to end up being a college coach. It's just going to be a matter of when that time is. And, as soon as she's done achieving her goals at the international level, she's already alluded to the fact that that's where her head is right now. But I don't think the landscape's going to be anywhere close to the same as it is right now here in 8 years.
Are you basically are you alluding to the fact that maybe potentially you could be coaching against Kayla at the college level one day?
That would be awesome.
I'll put words in your mouth because I want to see the drama. I want to sell the drama here.
I would really enjoy that, but I mean, she's going to be a phenomenal coach, so I would have my work cut out for me.
So again, April 9th, 2022, the NAIA has adopted women's wrestling as its 28th national championship sport. There's so much more to dive into on this, and I'm just waiting to see the response to feedback. But I'll talk with folks from the NAIA in the coming weeks to try to get the organizational perspective on it. But for the time being, I'd like to thank Coach Lee Miracle, Coach Ashley Sword Flavin. I don't know, Ashley, what are you going? Are you doing the full name now? I mean, I know we've been friends for 20 years. It's something that's like, I don't know how to, I want to be professional with it, but at the same point, we've been friends. Lee, how do you ask when your friend changes their name? What do you do, man? I don't know.
I just ask them. I'm pretty good.
Yeah. Well, so to your answer is go by most anything. The girls call me Coach Ashley.
Hey,
no
you?
one calls you occasionally. No one calls me Flavin. Christian is very
that's
much
him, yeah.
That's him. He's Flavin. He calls me Sword. My legal middle name is now Sword. So
all right, so I'll go full name. So
you can go full name. You can just go Ash, Jason.
Yeah,
if it's me and you, it can be Ash. We're good.
So for Coach Lee Miracle, Ashley Sword Flavin, I am Jason Matthew Bryant. You've been watching and listening to episode 700 of the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. Quite a monumentous one. Thanks, coaches. I appreciate the time, and good luck with your programs in the future. And this will not be the last time you're on the show. I guarantee it.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Jason.